This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. As always, I am Jason Jarvie. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvie the King, and we just get closer and closer to football and fantasy football drafts. We had the crazy thing happen where we were supposed to have our first preseason football game by now, but the NFL robbed us. The Hall of Fame game was canceled because of some paint on the field. You know, it basically, the paint solidified into almost like a concrete like substance, and it was deemed unsafe for the players. And we were robbed of seeing Andrew Luck v. Aaron Rodgers for about 5 minutes. In the whole grand scheme of things, it's not a whole lot of football we lost. I definitely feel bad for all the people who made the trip to Canton to see this game, and it sounds like they're going to be suing the NFL for refunds on their tickets and trying to get back their travel expenses. But there is a host of preseason football games happening this week. By the time this podcast comes out, we will have seen our first couple on Thursday night. Most people will have seen the New Orleans-New England matchup on the NFL Network. It's time to get pumped. And I got a ton of news for you guys to digest and to take this into your drafts. Now, I am recording a little bit early. I don't want to, show everybody how the sausage is made, but I am trying to get on vacation. So I'm giving you this a little bit early. So if any of this stuff changes by the time Friday rolls around, please don't fry me. I am giving you my best judgment at the time that I am reading this. So to kick off the NFL news, Houston Texans, Jalen Strong, he's actually listed right now as second on the depth chart, which should worry some people. They drafted Will Fuller really high in the first round of this NFL draft. They also picked Braxton Miller. So it's something that you're really going to have to watch. Jalen Strong came into camp this year. They said that he showed up in way better shape and that he's really, turning some heads in camp. You're going to have to watch this matchup to see, because Will Fuller is likely going to pull ahead of Jalen Strong by the time week one rolls around. But you aren't going to be able to forget Jalen Strong. And maybe he'll be more of a fantasy factor this year. And, last year it was really DeAndre Hopkins. They have a better quarterback now. They really had they had nobody as a quarterback last year. And I think they would like to think that Brock Osweiler is their franchise quarterback of the future. Only time will tell. So keep an eye on Jalen Strong and Will Fuller. Will Fuller right now is battling with Cecil Shorts and Keith Mumphrey. And I don't think anybody expects Fuller to be beaten out by those guys. But again, you're just going to have to watch. They have their preseason game on Sunday against the 49ers. I'm not sure how much we're going to get to see of Fuller, but it's something to keep your eye on. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans, head coach Mike Mularkey called out wide receiver Dorial Green-Beckham due to his inconsistency, which that's bad news. Going into this year, I think people were expecting Dorial Green-Beckham to kind of take a next step. I think people initially thought that he was, trending in that direction. But if Green Beckham isn't ready, it's bad news for really everybody on that team. They're saying right now he's not even He's not even first or second wide receiver. That he's behind, rookie wide receiver Taj Sharp, who was drafted well lower than Green Beckham, and he's also behind the free agent they picked up in Rashard Matthews. The guy, he's a freak of nature. He's 6'5", and he has a ton of talent. We knew that going in that it was a lot of raw talent. So it's something you're going to have to watch. And I think you're going to want to hear some good stuff coming out of training camp before you start moving him up in your drafts, or if you start kind of putting him on your list as a sleeper wide receiver. Sticking with the Tennessee Titans, Derrick Henry, their rookie running back, they spent a second-round pick on him. He scored twice in their scrimmage performance, and it's looking like the running back situation is getting a little bit more clear. You know, we've talked about a bunch on this podcast how it's just stacked with DeMarco Murray, Derrick Henry, Antonio Andrews, David Cobb, and then I'm sure there's another guy on that list who I'm forgetting. But right now, it's really looking like DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry. So they really could be viewed as a running back by committee, and it's going to be between those two guys. And more than likely throughout the season, you're going to see both of them play at certain times. And I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Mularkey went with the whole, who has the hot hand. So if DeMarco Murray is doing good, you may not see Derrick Henry. But then there's going to be games where if Derrick Henry's on a roll, then DeMarco Murray, that's going to hurt him. So I would, this might actually affect my where I draft DeMarco Murray. I'm not sure if it affects me drafting Derrick Henry. It may move him up just a few spots in average draft position, but DeMarco Murray, unless something comes out with the rest of training camp that Murray has really solidified himself as that number one running back, then I might actually drop him down, maybe even in an entire round, depending on where he's listed ADP wise. Moving on to the Washington Redskins, another place where the running back position is really up in the air. Matt Jones is likely going to be that number one guy, but the big question will be is can he fix his fumbling problems? They do have a decent backup behind him in Chris Thompson, but he's viewed more as a third down running back and that pass catching threat out of the backfield. But rookie running back Keith Marshall, he's coming up in the depth chart there. I think he's listed as third, and I truly believe that if Matt Jones were to go down, or if he just fell out of the graces of the coaching staff in Washington, Keith Marshall would likely be the guy that they would turn to, because I don't see Chris Thompson as that every down running back. I think Keith Marshall, he's more of a north-south runner, where Chris Thompson goes from side to side, and it's something to watch. And I think Keith Marshall, you have to move him up in your draft boards because he likely was going undrafted in most drafts. I think you got to move him up. Maybe keep an eye on him towards the end of the draft. I'm not saying go out and draft the guy in the 8th or 9th round. I'm just saying, if you're doing an online draft, put a flag next to him, or if you got a magazine, put a circle around Keith Marshall. Because he could be a handcuff guy. Because I don't think the staff in Washington is really, they're not married to one running back, and I think they're a team that they're gonna go. They have Kirk Cousins, and they have a host of wide receivers and tight ends with Jordan Reed that they want to throw the ball. And with the running game, it's just gonna be whoever can get the job done. So definitely keep an eye on that. An update from Eddie Lacy on last week, and we talked about that he hurt his ankle and that he was missing some time, but he has returned to practice, and we didn't get to see him. He probably wouldn't have played in that Hall of Fame game if the game took place. But I think the Packers, if they should really be monitoring his status, and I don't think you're going to see him in the next preseason game, and possibly not even the entire preseason, because Eddie Lacy is a guy that they're going to have to, they need him to be healthy the entire season. James Starks is a serviceable backup, and he proved last year that he's good in times. But Eddie Lacy he's the X factor on that team. It's all about Aaron Rodgers and Jordy Nelson. But you saw last year when he didn't have Jordy Nelson and he was missing Randall Cobb at the time. It would have been nice to have, that 1,400 yards from Eddie Lacy. It's just, I really feel Lacy is that X factor on that team, and the Packers are going to have to be smart about keeping him healthy. Going to the Pittsburgh Steelers, the wide receiver situation it's up in the air. Antonio Brown, no doubt, is arguably the best fantasy player in the past couple of years, and he's likely going to be drafted in the top of most fantasy football drafts. But after him is a pretty big question mark. Martavis Bryant, who would have been the number 2 guy, suspended for the entire year. So it falls onto the incumbent Marcus Wheaton and the relatively newcomer of Sammy Coates, who it's gonna be close. I think a lot of people like Sammy Coates because he's a bigger wide receiver, but Marcus Wheaton does have, even though he's only 5'11", he's played it. He's been in the league, and Coates only has 1 career reception. So I think if you're looking to draft that second wide receiver on the Steelers, I would probably go Marcus Wheaton. But I think Sammy Coates definitely has value, and both of those guys really should be rostered come fantasy draft time. Sammy Coates, maybe draft him a couple rounds after. Or if you are looking for that true sleeper and you're going for a risk, Sammy Coates, I think, he's a really good sleeper. Because that Pittsburgh offense is pretty potent, and they're going to throw the ball, even with D'Angelo Williams and Le'Veon Bell not there for the first couple weeks. They are still a pass first team. So the ball is going to be spread around, and Marcus Wheaton, Sammy Coates, both will probably end up being wide receiver 3 flex players. They're not going to give you enough to really, have them be that wide receiver 2 starting on your team every week. It is going to be kind of a toss-up. Going to the San Francisco 49ers, if you're looking for an answer at their quarterback, there is no answer right now. You may say, Blaine Gabbert or Colin Kaepernick, neither of those guys you would really want to be your starting quarterback, but I do like the possibility of Colin Kaepernick being the starting quarterback, because in Chip Kelly's offense, I think ever since Chip Kelly moved to the NFL, he hasn't had the right type of quarterback that for his system. When he was in Philadelphia, I think he really wanted, and he tried to move up in the draft to get Marcus Mariota. And we may be talking about Chip Kelly still being in Philadelphia if they get Mariota. But he dealt with quarterbacks who they didn't really fit his style. And, Blaine Gabbert, as much as they may say he's a mobile quarterback, Colin Kaepernick is a true mobile quarterback. You talk about Russell Wilson and Andrew Luck and Cam Newton. Those guys are mobile quarterbacks. You throw Colin Kaepernick in there as well. And he has the ability. He does have a track record of getting hurt. So I would watch this. And if Gabbert wins, I don't really care too much about Blaine Gabbert. I don't want him on my team at all. But if Colin Kaepernick does win out the starting position, I would definitely think twice. If I do get one of those higher tier quarterbacks as my starting for my starting lineup, I might look at Colin. I might wait and pick up depth at running back and wide receiver and other places. If Colin Kaepernick is there, I wouldn't feel horrible to throw out Colin Kaepernick for 1 week, but it's something to watch. Going back to the Green Bay Packers, wide receiver Ty Montgomery, from his ankle, they activated him off of the PUP list. It just makes that wide receiver situation even murkier. Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, those two are givens. They're going to be the number 1 and number 2 guy. So really it comes into who's going to step up and take that number 3 position. Going into last year, it was supposed to be Devontae Adams, but he couldn't figure it out. And part of that may be because he was thrusted into a number 2 position where Devontae Adams may be better served as a number 3 wide receiver. With Ty Montgomery there as well, and then you have Jeff Janis and the Jared Abbrederis. I think Abbrederis is probably out. Janis will be the boomer bust. He may have a week here or there, and he'll cause a stir mid-season because he has a 10-catch, 150-yard game. But then he'll go back to relatively nothing. But to truly find the number 3 wide receiver, I would say it's between Ty Montgomery and Davante Adams. And you'll find stuff and find experts saying for both that it's going to be Davante Adams, that it's going to be Ty Montgomery. I would probably put a slight edge at Ty Montgomery. I see him more as that slot receiver, where Davante Adams is more of your outside vertical threat. And I just don't see him getting the same kind of time that Ty Montgomery is going to get. Going to San Diego, wide receiver Stevie Johnson underwent knee surgery, and he's going to miss some time. So the wide receiver situation there, Keenan Allen was coming off of his injury. He's the number 1 guy, but I think it was going to be between Stevie Johnson and the free agent signing Travis Benjamin to be that number 2 guy. So obviously Travis Benjamin becomes the number 2 option pretty much by default. And then they still have Tyrell Williams and Dontrell Inman. And it looks like they signed James Jones as well. I like Dontrell Inman. He kind of came on for a little bit last season. But if Keenan Allen and Travis Benjamin can stay healthy, when Stevie Johnson does get healthy and come back, it would essentially be kind of like getting a number 2 wide receiver back. I'd probably drop him down in my drafts, depending on how long he's going to be out. But if he's out for a lengthy period of time, I'm still gonna look at drafting him maybe later in the draft, especially if I've already addressed my wide receiver position a fair amount. He's just gonna be a boost to my lineup when he does get healthy. In the Cleveland Browns, Corey Coleman, they're saying he does have a tight hamstring, but they are looking that he's going to play against Green Bay in their preseason game. Now, I'm not sure how much he's going to play or what we're actually going to see him do, because the Browns need to keep Corey Coleman healthy, because they're going to have Josh Gordon hopefully coming back after week 4. We'll see about that, and if the guy can stay clean for another month or two. But it's going to be, after Corey Coleman, they're actually looking at Terrell Pryor being the number 2 wide receiver behind him, which is kind of mind-blowing to me right now. Terrell Pryor went from, he messed up at Ohio State, and then he was kind of just entrenched in Oakland. They tried to do him as a quarterback. They tried to use him as a wide receiver, and now he may actually get a chance at being a starting wide receiver. So Corey Coleman, Terrell Pryor, Josh Gordon, all people you're going to have to watch. Josh Gordon is, out of those 3, Josh Gordon will be interesting to see where people draft him, because if he is, there's a lot of arguments for and against him. You saw what kind of talent he has. He has the ability to be one of the best fantasy wide receivers in the league, but he is going to be coming off almost, over a year of not playing. So is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be game ready? I think the positives for him being ready is that he's going to be traveling with the team. He still gets to practice. So Josh Gordon, when he comes back from his suspension, could be a real boost for those Cleveland Browns. No word yet on, though, if whoever the quarterback is can get him the ball. So that'll be something to watch. Another guy relatively out of nowhere, the Bills recently, they signed Reggie Bush because of all their issues with running backs, with LaShawn McCoy and Carlos Williams, and it's just kind of a mess there. So they went out, they signed Reggie Bush, and currently he's listed as the 3rd running back. So beyond LaShawn McCoy, Carlos Williams, he's number 1. So with Carlos Williams sitting out the first 4 weeks from suspension, we may actually get some play out of Reggie Bush if he can stay healthy. I said when he was on San Francisco that within the first, couple drives that he played that he'd be injured. And lo and behold, he got injured. But apparently he's saying, from what people are saying at Bill's camp, is that he looks ready and that he's been turning some heads in camp. He could even be their top kickoff return guy. So if you're a league that you get points for return yards or return touchdowns, that could be a boost. But Reggie Bush is just he's a big risk because he has the ability to be flashy. And, when I personally have seen him as a Detroit Lions fan, when he's healthy, he can be good, but he just can't stay healthy. So that's going to be something to watch. Going on to the Denver Broncos, Trevor Siemian and Mark Sanchez, the battle for the quarterback that I don't think anybody really wants to win because you're taking over for a legend in Peyton Manning. But it still looks like it's a toss-up. In their first preseason game, Mark Sanchez is slated to start the first quarter, and Trevor Siemian is slated to start the second quarter, with rookie Paxton Lynch starting the entire second half. And more than likely, the second preseason game, it's going to be flip-flopped with Siemian going the first quarter and Sanchez going the second quarter. So it's still just a big question mark. And from everything coming out of Broncos camp is that the race is really, really close. And I'm actually kind of rooting for Trevor Siemian now. I would think that Mark Sanchez, that's logically who they're going to pick as the starter. But I kind of want to see this kid, Trevor Siemian, come out of really nowhere and just be the starter for the team, because Mark Sanchez is garbage, and I don't really want to see him succeed. Going to the Seattle Seahawks, Coach Pete Carroll said that Jimmy Graham is right at the edge of getting back and that he's really close. So Jimmy Graham isn't likely to play in their Saturday preseason opener against the Chiefs. But if he makes it back to the practice field and we start seeing him, participate in some drills, it's gonna move up his draft stock. Right now I think he's right on the edge of the top 10 for tight ends. If he can make it back, if he can even play in a preseason game, I think you move him up almost to the top 5. Now, you move him up to the top 5, knowing that there will be some risk because he's gonna have to get kind of back into game shape unless you see him at training camp and just he's a workhorse. There's gonna be risk because you never know if he's just gonna get injured again, and you never know if the Seahawks are gonna really incorporate him in the offense. I think we saw towards the end of before he got injured that they started using him, but you never know. Going to the Oakland Raiders, right now Latavius Murray listed as the number 1 running back, but rookie DeAndre Washington has been taking reps with the first team, and he's getting probably the bulk of the second team reps. He's currently listed behind Tywan Jones on the depth chart, but I think probably by the end of camp, DeAndre Washington will be the direct backup behind Latavius Murray. And Murray is a guy who I think he's good. He could have some, he could be effective this year, but the Raiders are a team, I think that they're just trying to figure it out. And if Murray has any kind of faltering, then DeAndre Washington could be the benefactor of that. So Washington, a guy you should put on your radar, and then just kind of stash him away maybe. Going to the New York Giants, Victor Cruz. We talked last week a little bit about how he came into camp and that he looks like he's ready to go. And unfortunately to say, though, it looks like he injured his groin on Tuesday. And they're not saying, how bad it is right now, but it's just another setback for this guy who has the ability to be a great wide receiver. But it's something at this point you're just wondering, can he ever stay healthy? I feel like he's been dealing with stuff for the past year and a half now. So that's something you're going to have to watch. If he can get back into camp, that would be great. But I think you kind of have to drop Victor Cruz in your drafts, because you just, if you're trying to minimize risk in the players that you're putting on your team, Victor Cruz is going to be a big risk if you're drafting him high at all. So Victor Cruz, I would definitely drop him down in draft boards. Going to the New England Patriots, they had a scare. Julian Edelman went down in practice, but from what everybody is saying and reporting, the possible foot injury is going to be fine, and they're just being pretty precautious. After Edelman, there really isn't a lot on the New England Patriots. Rob Gronkowski is a big proponent of the passing game, but Julian Edelman really is that number one wide receiver, and there isn't a whole lot after him. Danny Amendola, Keyshawn Martin, and just a host of other wide receiver scrubs. So it's good to see that Edelman, he's listed as day-to-day. I don't really predict him to play in the preseason opener against the Saints. I'd be really surprised, because they should be taking every precaution to get this guy healthy into the season. Going to the Philadelphia Eagles, Jordan Matthews right now looking like he's going to be out a couple of weeks with some knee discomfort. He tweaked it in practice earlier, and they initially thought he's just going to be day-to-day, but he's going to be out for a few weeks now. So it does give an opportunity for the other wide receivers to show what they can do. And that moves on to the other wide receivers. Currently, Ruben Randall, who I think was initially brought in to be the number 2 guy because Nelson Aguilar failed so hard. Ruben Randall is actually listed at 3 behind Nelson Aguilar, and it's just surprising. I was kind of all off the Nelson Aguilar train, but from what everybody's saying is that he has been looking good in camp, and he does have a lot of talent, but be very, very cautious with both of these receivers, Ruben Randall and Nelson Aguilar. I predict Jordan Matthews, he'll be ready for week 1, but Doug Peterson, the new head coach, truly is a disciple of Andy Reid, and if what we've seen out of the Andy Reid offense, there isn't going to be a whole lot of balls for wide receivers. Jeremy Maclin kind of came in and broke the streak for the Chiefs last year. Jordan Matthews will be the number 1 guy, and then it's just going to be a gigantic toss-up, whether it's going to be Ruben Randall or Nelson Aguilar. Or who knows, maybe even Chris Givens or Josh Huff will throw in a game here or there. But be very cautious drafting Ruben Randall and really any Eagles wide receiver. And to wrap up the news, with the Baltimore Ravens, Justin Forsett is impressing coaches at camp. It was kind of looking like those other guys, Terrence West, Kenneth Dixon, were getting a bunch of hype, but John Harbaugh came out and said that their incumbent starting running back he's also been quite impressive. He's been limited a little bit coming back from his injury, but Forsett is still slated to be the starter week 1. Now, I know we talked last week when I was with my brother Joel that he thought Terrence West would eventually be the starter. I said Kenneth Dixon will be the starter. I think those are bold predictions. Justin Forsett more than likely is going to start the season as the starter, and this kind of just reaffirms that. It'll be interesting to see who shakes out as the number 2 guy. They still have Buck Allen there, so it's something you're going to have to watch. I would still stand by myself. If you were looking to draft a backup for Forsett, I would look at Kenneth Dixon. And if Terrence West does continue to turn heads in training camp, maybe Terrence West. But that wraps up the portion of the news. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk about some of those backup players. To draft all those starters, the Antonio Browns, the Adrian Petersons. But I'm going to talk about their backups and what players you should be targeting later in the draft, who could really pan out for you. And you're listening to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is now available in the App Store. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. As I said before the break, I'm going to talk about players who you should be looking at, who aren't the no-brainers, the Odell Beckham Jr.'s, the Cam Newtons. I'm talking about the backups to all these players. So I'll start with some running backs who you should be targeting in drafts, who could make a difference on your team, really regardless if the starter goes down, or they may even have some value in tandem with their starting players. So looking with the Cardinals, David Johnson, he's been talked about. I don't believe in him, but he's been talked about as a first-round running back, and that he's going to be really good this year. But I don't think you can discount the guy behind him. Chris Johnson, he really had that position last year. And he was having a resurgence. It seemed like the entire Arizona Cardinals were having a resurgent year with Carson Palmer and Larry Fitzgerald, and even with Chris Johnson. But when he went down with the injury, David Johnson really kind of solidified his hold on that position. But Chris Johnson is definitely worthy of drafting a little bit later, just in case anything happens to David Johnson, or if he has that sophomore slump, which I definitely think could happen. Another running back who, he was the best running back last year, Devontae Freeman. He was benched the first couple weeks because rookie Tevin Coleman won the job. When Tevin Coleman got hurt, Freeman took over. But this year, they've been talking that they're gonna try and keep Freeman fresh for the entire year. So I think Tevin Coleman is still gonna get some play, and there's going to be weeks where he might not outperform, but he's going to have some good weeks for you. So he could be good to have good depth on your team if you are in a pinch, and he could be a good flex player. And definitely if anything happened to Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman could be, I think he has the ability to be a running back one, but more than likely he could be a solid running back two. The Chicago Bears running back situation, definitely still up in the air. Jeremy Langford looks like the starter right now, but from what everybody's saying is that Jordan Howard is creeping up the depth chart there. So Jordan Howard is a guy you're going to want to look at in drafts. And if you do draft later, it may even, come down to Jordan Howard being the starter for that team. So definitely keep an eye on him. Jeremy Hill with the Cincinnati Bengals, with him and Giovanni Bernard, I don't think there is a true, number one running back. It's a running back by committee. One of those guys, both of those guys have the potential, to produce week in, week out. Jeremy Hill, I think, is a little bit more tied to his goal line touchdowns, where Giovanni Bernard is probably a little bit more valuable in a PPR league. So both of those guys really are going to go high in drafts. And if one of them were to go down for a length of time, though that running back will become a running back one. In Dallas, Ezekiel Elliott should be the workhorse. I don't think there's too much worry about the injury that he sustained. But Darren McFadden showed last year, definitely still has some left in the tank, and really anybody running behind that Dallas offensive line is going to be really solid. The Detroit situation, Amir Abdullah is going to be your number one running back. But in PPR leagues, Theo Riddick does have a lot of value because Matt Stafford is just constantly checking down. And if the offensive line problems haven't been fixed this year, he's probably going to be doing the same, that he's going to have to be doing a lot of quick dump-offs, and Theo Riddick will be the benefactor there. Looking down the list of running backs, Jacksonville, I think it's still up in the air right now. TJ Yeldon and Chris Ivory of who's going to be that running back, who's going to be the main guy. I really like TJ Yeldon, but they didn't. I don't think they didn't bring Chris Ivory in for no reason. So definitely monitor that situation. But both guys definitely deserve to be rostered, and they're both gonna have their games. Still looking down the list, the Miami situation it's a mess. Ever since they brought in Arian Foster, it just kind of threw everybody a wrench. Jay Ajayi was going to be the starter, but now he gets pushed back again. I don't know what that does. It might do something to his psyche. You know, he was preparing and ready to take over for Lamar Miller, and the Dolphins, they go out and they get another guy, an aging running back who has injury problems. So what does that say in the confidence that they have in Jay Ajayi? That does concern me a little bit for him. I do like Kenyon Drake, the rookie running back there, but more than likely it's going to be Foster and then Ajayi. I like what Jerick McKinnon has behind Adrian Peterson. I think for everybody's sake who drafts AP in the first round, they don't want to hear that. They want AP to be the guy and the guy who's getting all the carries. But Jerick McKinnon, I think they're going to use him. They used him more towards the end of last season. And, you know, with AP getting another year older, he's over 30. If they want to keep him fresh, I think they're going to have to put Jerick McKinnon into game. So he's going to, even if AP is completely healthy, McKinnon's going to have a couple weeks where he may actually surpass, because I think he has the talent to be a number one running back. The New England running back situation, always up in the air. Bill Belichick is famous for just benching people for one mistake. So Dion Lewis, coming off of his injury, is going to be the number one guy. But if he gets hurt at all, LeGarrette Blount will be the benefactor there. And Blount will still have his days because he's the big running back who they're going to put in on goal line situations. I mentioned DeAndre Washington in the news, that I think he's likely going to be the backup behind Latavius Murray. You know, Murray, he always seems to be on the bubble of, you know, is he going to play? Is he not going to play? So Washington, I'm not saying you have to go out and get his handcuff. You know, there are players, the Le'Veon Bells, the Jamal Charles, the Adrian Petersons. Those are guys you really should be getting handcuffs for. Latavius Murray, getting DeAndre Washington as a handcuff, maybe a little bit of a reach. But I do like the potential that Washington has. In San Diego, you can't forget their running back situation. It's a mess. Melvin Gordon, all these running back situations are messes. But Melvin Gordon, from what they're saying in camp, he does look a lot better. He's completely healthy. But you can't deny what Danny Woodhead did when he was healthy last year. So I think he'll probably still eat into his carries. But if Gordon can stay healthy, Woodhead, you'll probably see a reduction in his stats this year. But if Gordon were to get hurt, Danny Woodhead would be a really, really good backup. In Tampa Bay, Doug Martin had a resurgence last year. He was dealing with the injury the year before and kind of came out, and everybody really had counted him out, but he came back. And I think Charles Sims, the running back behind him, is a pretty serviceable backup who could turn some heads if Doug Martin misses time this year. So moving on to wide receivers, you know, running backs, it's always kind of those situations are messes because the league truly is moving to a wide receiver league. So you're going to find more depth in the third and fourth wide receivers on teams. So I'm gonna list you off some guys who I think could make some differences on teams. The biggest guy, the number 3 wide receiver on the Arizona Cardinals. They are a pass-first team with Larry Fitzgerald and John Brown. I think Michael Floyd falls to that number 3 guy, but he has the potential to give you, at least wide receiver 2 points. So you're going to want to have him on your radar. Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints, I've talked about him before. He is a rookie, but he was drafted really to come in and replace and serve in the Marcus Colson role. He's a big wide receiver who's going to be a red zone threat. So if he can really step into that position, he's going to score you some points. Going on to the Indianapolis Colts, T.Y. Hilton and Dante Moncrief are the 2 big guys, but they drafted Philip Dorsett for a reason, and he is a deep threat. He's going to burn some people, and if Andrew Luck can get back to the form that he was 2 years ago, then Dorsett he's going to have some big games. He's more of a boomer bust player, but I like what he has. I think he could really turn some heads, and he's going to turn the tides of some fantasy games this year. I talked earlier, I think Sammy Coates, really all those wide receivers in the Pittsburgh system they're gonna get some numbers. They're all gonna perform at some point. Antonio Brown, every week he's gonna be good, but Marcus Wheaton and Sammy Coates are both gonna have pretty big games at some point in the season. So definitely watch him. Going to the Cincinnati Bengals, they lost Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu. So they have A.J. Green. He's their number 1 option. And then they picked up Brandon LaFell. But I really like rookie Tyler Boyd as being that slot receiver. He could turn some heads. Draft him. I would draft him later in your drafts. There's going to be a lot of wide receivers to pick up. So Tyler Boyd probably falls closer to the end of the draft. But it's possible that he could turn some heads. Carolina Panthers, Ted Ginn was really kind of the story last year, with Kelvin Benjamin being out for the season. I know I had my doubts on that offense and that, can Cam Newton survive without having a wide receiver? And he proved that he could. Ted Ginn, I'd completely written him off, and he scored 10 touchdowns last year. But you got Kelvin Benjamin coming back fully healthy. Devin Funchess is looking to be the number 2 guy, and I think he's looking to prove some people that he can be a really good wide receiver. Ted Ginn, he's probably he's not going to have the season that he had last year, but I think he still could have some pretty decent games. So I'd probably draft him a little bit later. The Detroit Lions, my own team, it's kind of up in the air, the number 3 wide receiver. I want to say that Anquan Bolden is going to have a decent season, but on the other hand, I also would like TJ Jones to step up and be the next guy. Anquan Bolden, I wouldn't be surprised if he's only here for 1 year. It's possible he could retire at the end of the season. So I would rather have TJ Jones step up and be that number 3 guy. So he's going to be somebody I would watch through training camp, watch in preseason, and see how he develops with Matt Stafford and with the offense. And TJ Jones, Anquan Bolden are both going to be, they're going to have their moments. Anquan Bolden, just because he's that name, and he's going to have a game where he gets 1 or 2 touchdowns. But I would put my money more on TJ Jones to be kind of that sleeper wide receiver. Going out to Seattle, Doug Baldwin really became an all-star last year, catching just a ton of touchdowns. I'm not sure if he can produce at that level again this year. Tyler Lockett really kind of emerged as the number 2 guy there. And I think the receiver who's getting forgotten is Jermaine Kearse. Jermaine Kearse, I think at one point was the number 1 guy on the team, or the number 1 option for Russell Wilson. And I think with it's a team that's transitioning. They don't have Marshawn Lynch. There's gigantic question marks with Thomas Rawls and everybody else behind him. So I think Russell Wilson is going to be throwing more this year. So Doug Baldwin is going to get his play, and Tyler Lockett is a deep threat. And I think Jermaine Kearse is going to fit in really well in that slot position. It's just going to be, how much are they going to roll out with a 3 wide receiver set? That's the only thing you got to worry about. If Pete Carroll tries to stick with the run, but if they do, I think Jermaine Kearse, I'm not saying he's going to be a starter every week, but he has potential to have good games here or there. Going to Jacksonville, Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns, two of the best fantasy wide receivers right now. Allen Robinson, obviously the number one guy, and I think Allen Hurns you can't really slouch about. And I think the guy who's going to get the play after him is Rashad Green. They drafted him last year, and he's got wheels, so he's going to be a nice slot receiver for Blake Bortles, who is he's quickly becoming one of the top quarterbacks in fantasy. So I would look for him to make some waves. And if I want to give you one more receiver to look at in your drafts, I would probably say Devin Smith for the New York Jets. Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, they had a resurgence last year. They really changed things up. But Devin Smith was drafted pretty high and they drafted him for a reason. Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, they are older. And I think with Devin Smith, when he comes off of the PUP list, it's somebody you're going to want to have to watch. Fitzpatrick is comfortable with Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, but I think Devin Smith does give him a deep threat that he's going to be a boomer bust type player. So I would watch him. And that wraps up the players that you should be watching who may be off of your radar. That about wraps up the show, but I can't end it without giving you my King's Decree. My King's Decree this week is that Alshon Jeffrey, Chicago Bears wide receiver, will not be the number one wide receiver for the Bears. Now, you may think I'm crazy because when he's healthy, he is a very, very good wide receiver. He has the potential to be a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. But I think Kevin White is going to emerge this year. They drafted him really high. He is a freak. He's tall, and he does kind of look like a clone of Alshon Jeffrey. Right now, the projections for both of those guys, Alshon Jeffrey projected at 92 receptions, 1,300 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And Kevin White is projected at 64 receptions, 935 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I'm not saying that those numbers are going to be flip-flopped and that Kevin White is going to completely outperform Alshon Jeffrey. But what I am basing this prediction on is that Alshon Jeffrey has a difficulty staying healthy. He missed considerable amount of time last season, and of his 4 seasons, he's missed time in 2 of them. So that's why I think Kevin White is going to emerge, and he could end up as the number one wide receiver on the Bears by the end of the season. And I think the Chicago Bears may even be banking on Kevin White being this good. They didn't offer Alshon Jeffrey a new contract this year. They franchised him. So it's all on Alshon Jeffrey right now to compete and earn that contract. But I think if he does slip up, Kevin White will be the guy, and they'll let Alshon Jeffrey walk next year. So that's what I'm basing this prediction on. If Alshon Jeffrey stays healthy the entire year, this is probably going to be a busted prediction. But that's why it's a bold prediction. And that's why I think Alshon Jeffrey won't be the top receiver in Chicago this year, and that's my King's decree. That wraps it up for this episode of the Fantasy Nerds, sponsored by the Fan Up Network. Next week, we'll talk about the first round of preseason games, see what happened. Hopefully nobody got too hurt. Hopefully teams, got through relatively healthy, but stuff happens. And I will have all that news and information for you next week. Until then, later, nerds.